It's unsettling what you can find buried in the comments of online videos. Sometimes, going through trans, I stumble across things that really stick with me. For example, I recently read a comment where someone was casually talking about killing any snake over 4 feet long that they came across. It's a stark reminder of how easily aggression and even threats can be shared online. Today, I want to talk about a specific incident, one that began on July 21st, 2016, at a palm tree farm near Palangkaraya in Indonesia. The morning, I understand, was quiet and humid, the air heavy from the previous night's rain. By evening, a truly terrible event would unfold, shocking everyone who worked there. The man at the center of this was Reggie Peters. He was 32 years old, originally from Britain, and worked as a farm advisor, focusing on improving the water systems vital for growing palm trees. Those who knew him described him as a quiet man, dedicated to his work. He had a habit of walking the farm alone, meticulously noting problems in a small notebook. Reggie had been in Indonesia for about 4 months. During that time, he'd taken hundreds of photos, documenting the insects, birds, and other animals he encountered. It struck the workers that Reggie never tried to scare away snakes or lizards. Instead, he would kneel down, observing them closely. On that particular day, Reggie set out to do his usual rounds. The rainy season was approaching, so he needed to inspect the water ditches, ensuring they weren't blocked, which could lead to flooding. He packed his notebook, a measuring tape, and his phone for recording observations. Around noon, 2 workers, Amir and Luthi, spotted Reggie near a muddy ditch. He was kneeling, writing in his notebook. They jokingly mentioned the large snakes that locals claimed to see near the water channels. Reggie apparently laughed, saying he would love to see one of these big snakes up close. According to the workers, he didn't seem concerned about their warnings, dismissing them as old wives' tales. The palm farm was vast, stretching for miles. Rows of palm trees were separated by narrow water channels. The ground, softened by recent rain, was muddy and slippery in places. Dragonflies hovered over the water, and mosquitoes filled the air. The only sounds were the distant drone of chainsaws and the low croaking of frogs in the ditches. The heat made everything feel still and heavy. This area, you see, is home to large snakes called reticulated pythons, some of the largest in the world. They can grow to be over 20 feet long and weigh more than 200 pounds. These snakes are ambush predators, lying in wait near water for animals like pigs or dogs. Occasionally, they even attack people. While such attacks are rare in this part of Indonesia, the snakes have been moving closer to human activity, as their natural habitats are destroyed. Locals knew to avoid these snakes, and some even carried long knives for protection when working near the water. As late afternoon approached, Reggie had not returned to the camp. Amir began to worry and started walking towards the last place he'd seen him. The farm was almost silent, save for the constant buzzing of insects. That's when Amir saw something that made him freeze. One of Reggie's boots was stuck in the mud near the water channel. A few feet away, an enormous python lay coiled. The snake's midsection was hugely swollen, as if it had consumed a very large animal. Amir stood motionless for a moment, then began shouting for Luffy and the other workers. Within minutes, 5 men were standing there, watching the snake as it slowly began to move towards the bushes. The swollen midsection dragged heavily on the ground, leaving a deep track in the mud. The workers grabbed sticks and long poles, attempting to poke at the snake from a distance. The python hissed loudly and opened its mouth wide, displaying its curved teeth, coiling up in defense. The snake was massive, about 15 feet long. None of the workers dared to approach it. The farm supervisor arrived and immediately called the local police. While they waited, the men kept a careful watch on the snake. At one point, the swollen belly seemed to shift slightly, as if something inside was moving. The image of Reggie's body, curled up and covered in slime inside that massive python, has stayed with me. I can only imagine the horror of those workers as they cut open the snake, the mud and fluid mixing on the ground to reveal such a gruesome sight. His clothes, soaked and torn, spoke of a desperate struggle. And then, just a few months later, another tragedy unfolded, this time in India. It was March 15th, 2014, in Ranthambore National Park, Rajasthan. The air was cool, a welcome change after a scorching day. The campsite was shrouded in darkness, save for the faint moonlight. Inside one of the tents, 2 travellers were asleep, unaware that a snake had silently slipped beneath the canvas. Clare Johnson, a 26-year-old graphic designer from Melbourne, Australia, had embarked on a year-long adventure through Asia. She'd saved for 2 years, driven by a desire to experience as much of the world as possible. Her friends knew her as adventurous, yet cautious. She meticulously researched her destinations, packed medical supplies, and kept a detailed blog for her family. Ranthambore was a place she'd longed to visit, dreaming of photographing wild tigers. She'd even seen one that day, a female near a watering hole. She was staying at a budget-friendly eco-camp just outside the park gates, sharing a tent with Lara, a German student she'd met on the train from Jaipur. The camp was simple but clean, with tents built on raised platforms and secured with zippers. Claire was meticulous about keeping their tent tidy, always shaking out her shoes and ensuring the entrance was properly sealed each night. That evening, feeling the chill of the March air, she zipped the canvas door shut, leaving only a small opening for ventilation. The camp was bordered by dry grasslands dotted with thorny acacia trees and tall grasses, creating pockets of shade. The night was alive with the sounds of buzzing insects, clicking noises, and the occasional call of a peacock in the distance. The ground around the tents was hard-packed dirt, scattered with leaves and small stones, an ideal environment for the small reptiles that hunted during the cool hours before dawn. Spectacled cobras were common in Rajasthan, identifiable by the distinctive circular pattern on their hoods. They usually avoided people, but sometimes ventured into human areas in search of mice, rats, or warmth. Adult cobras could grow up to 6 feet long, possessing a potent venom that could be fatal to humans within hours without proper medical treatment. Local guides routinely warned campers to inspect their bedding and shake out their clothes before sleeping, as snakes sometimes sought refuge inside unnoticed. Sometime after 4 a.m., Lara was awakened by a soft rustling sound near the bottom of the tent. Still half asleep, she reached for her phone and switched on the flashlight. The beam revealed a sight that froze her with fear. A spectacled cobra coiled just inches from Clare's sleeping bag, its head slightly raised. Before Lara could react, Clare stirred in her sleep and stretched out her leg. Her bare ankle brushed against the snake's body. The cobra struck with incredible speed, sinking both fangs into the soft skin just above her heel. The bites happened so quickly that Lara almost missed them until Clare gasped and recoiled. Lara screamed, waking everyone in the camp. Clare sat up, clutching her ankle, where 2 small puncture wounds from the snake's teeth were visible. Camp workers rushed to the tent with flashlights, spotting the snake as it slithered out. Clare's breathing became rapid and shallow, and those who saw her said her eyes looked strange and glazed over. When she tried to stand, her legs buckled beneath her. Her voice was barely audible as she described her legs feeling like jelly before collapsing back onto her sleeping mat. The camp had no anti-venom. The staff quickly loaded Clare into a jeep to rush her to the nearest hospital. Lara accompanied her, pressing a scarf above the bite marks in an attempt to slow the spread of the venom. The journey to the hospital took over 40 minutes on rough, unpaved roads. Halfway there, Clare stopped responding. Her skin turned pale, feeling cold and clammy. When they finally arrived at the small rural clinic, the medical staff delivered the devastating news. There was nothing they could do to save her. I've spent years studying how easily a moment of carelessness can turn into tragedy, especially in the wilderness. I remember one case that stayed with me for a long time, a stark reminder of the hidden dangers lurking close to nature. It involved a young woman named Lara, a cautionary tale whispered among backpackers for years. Later that day, Lara's parents were contacted through the Australian Embassy, requesting her body be cremated following local customs. The camp management, deciding not to close, hired a local snake expert. He began giving weekly talks to new guests, teaching them how to properly check their tents and where to keep lights on at night to avoid snake encounters. Lara eventually returned to Germany and wrote a detailed account of her experience on a travel website. Her story served as a warning to other backpackers, urging them to always inspect their tents, bedding, and shoes when staying in areas where snakes might be present. For years, this post was quietly shared, a serious reminder to travelers who romanticized sleeping close to nature without truly grasping the potential dangers. This incident underscores how vital it is for travelers to take safety precautions seriously when venturing into wilderness areas. Even experienced and cautious individuals can face unforeseen dangers when wild animals and humans share the same space. The tragedy serves as a reminder that proper preparation and awareness can be life-saving when traveling in remote natural areas. Then there's the story of Jorge Cruz. It was September 9th, 2015. In a small lime orchard outside a rural town near Veracruz, Mexico. Jorge was 42 years old and had worked in this orchard his entire life. He rose before sunrise each day to check the water systems, prune the trees, and teach his eldest son how to distinguish healthy fruit from diseased. The villagers knew Jorge as a reliable man, someone who would mend broken carts for his neighbors and lend them tools without expecting anything in return. He had a habit, formed in childhood, of working barefoot. He believed it helped him feel the ground better and move faster when climbing the lower branches. The afternoon was intensely hot, the air heavy. The sun beat down on the leaves with such intensity that everything seemed still. This orchard had been in the same family for generations. On this particular day, the normal work routine would be interrupted by something that changed everything in just one moment. Jorge was working with two neighbors, Raul and Mateo, picking limes on the far side of the grove, where workers had recently piled cut tree branches after clearing the area. The three men joked about the heat as they moved among the low branches, filling bags with limes. Jorge wore his wide hat pushed back on his head and an old faded shirt. He reached for a low branch, shifting his weight to pull the fruit closer. The ground in the orchard was hard dirt, covered with fallen leaves and thin roots. The pile of cut branches offered cool shade for mice, rats, and small reptiles. A patch of wild plants marked the edge of the orchard, and the low treetops cast long, shifting shadows across the ground. It was very quiet, so small sounds like fruit falling or clothes brushing against bark were easily heard. The men were focused on their work and conversation, unaware of the potential dangers around them. A type of poisonous snake, Bothrops asper, locally known as the tersopielo or noyasa, inhabits Central America. These snakes are thick-bodied, typically growing to be 3 to 5 feet long. They possess a highly dangerous venom that destroys skin and muscle, causing severe bleeding at the bite site and affecting blood clotting and blood press throughout the body. These snakes blend seamlessly with fallen leaves, often remaining completely still until someone steps close. Their bite usually causes extreme pain, and the area swells up very quickly. That morning, neighbors had spoken of seeing more snakes due to recent rains. Jorge's wife had urged him to wear boots while clearing brush and debris. The pile of cut branches where they were working was a temporary heap of trimmings, precisely the kind of place where snakes like to hide. Raul later said he had warned Jorge to be careful, but Jorge dismissed their concerns, saying he would work quickly. As Jorge shifted his position, the snake attacked instantly. It burst out from the leaves and bit the skin just above his ankle. Raul and Mateo heard Jorge let out a short, sharp cry of pain, and saw him pull his foot back, grabbing at the wound. Before they could react, the snake bit him a second time. Dark blood spotted the dirt where his foot had been. The pain struck Jorge immediately and was excruciating. He doubled over, dropping the fruit he was holding. Within minutes, his lower leg began to swell, and the skin started to bruise and discolor. He began vomiting and sweating profusely, his face turning pale. Raul quickly tied a piece of cloth above the bite marks, and they immobilized Jorge's leg by making a splint from a broom handle. A neighbor brought a small wooden cart, and they lifted Jorge into it, pushing the cart toward the dirt road leading back to the village. The trip to the clinic was bumpy and slow. Dust covered Jorge's damp skin, and he became confused, speaking incoherently and drifting in and out of consciousness. At the small village clinic, a nurse examined his swollen leg and noted that his pulse was weak and his blood pressure was low. The clinic had basic medical supplies, but no anti-venom, the special medicine needed to treat snake bites. The staff used their radio to call the regional health centre for help, but the nearest supply of anti-venom and a properly equipped ambulance were hours away. Jorge's condition worsened. He became increasingly disoriented, and his breathing became shallow. The medical staff was helpless to improve his condition. By evening, Jorge had died at the clinic despite their efforts to stop the bleeding and help him breathe. Raoul said they tried to kill the snake, but it disappeared into the thick plants. I've seen firsthand how quickly a familiar landscape can turn dangerous. In a small village, the kind where everyone knows everyone, life revolves around the rhythms of nature. But sometimes those rhythms bring unexpected risks. A simple brush pile, a harmless-looking river bend, they can become places of sudden tragedy. After Jorge's accident, his flip phone and work notebook were returned to his family, stained with the memory of what happened. In the weeks that followed, a travelling veterinarian came to the village. He carried a small supply of antivenom and, more importantly, shared vital knowledge. He taught the local people how to respond in emergencies, how to improvise splints, apply press bandages, and understand when a tourniquet could help or harm. The villagers worked together to clean up the area where the accident occurred, marking it clearly. They even erected a simple pole marker where Jorge had been bitten, a constant reminder. His wife, a poignant figure, began wearing his wide-brimmed hat during harvest, a visible symbol of his absence. The lime trees, however, continued to bear fruit. From that day forward, each harvest season began with a moment of sombre reflection, a reminder to be vigilant and protect one another. Then I think of Mina Belagan. It was May 2nd, 2018, and the air hung heavy over the Cross River. Mina, just 19, had returned from university only a week before. She loved spending her afternoons by the water. Everyone knew Mina for her vibrant spirit. She'd often bring her cousins to swim, ignoring the warnings of the older villagers about the increased snake activity during the dry season. She simply believed nothing dangerous could happen in the shallows. On that day, she convinced 4 of her cousins to join her. They left their sandals and shirts on the rocks and waded into the cool water. Mina was full of dreams about returning to school and starting a community project to teach younger children how to swim safely. She always saw the river as a source of life, not danger. Her cousins trusted her implicitly, following her without a second thought. The afternoon was still. Every sound seemed amplified. The river's surface mirrored the cloudless sky, but beneath the calm, something was moving. They chose a wide, shallow part of the river, its muddy banks a favorite spot for fishermen. The air was humid. Dragonflies flitted just above the surface. Even on that bright day, the dense vegetation on the opposite bank cast long shadows over the deeper water. African rock pythons, the continent's largest snakes, can grow to over 20 feet. They lie in wait, perfectly still, until an animal ventures too close. Then they strike with immense force, their jaws locking before their body coils around their prey, squeezing until it can no longer breathe. While attacks on humans are rare, they are known to prey on goats, dogs, and even antelopes. During the dry season, these pythons often hunt near dwindling water sources, where animals gather to drink. Earlier that week, an older fisherman warned Mina's uncle that he had spotted a massive python basking on a nearby log. The children had been told to stay out of the water until the rains returned and raised the water levels. But Mina insisted the shallow bend where they swam was safe. Mina had been in the water for almost an hour, playing and floating on her back, when one of her cousins noticed something long and dark moving toward them. At first, they dismissed it as a tree branch caught in the current. But then it curved, moving silently across the surface, and a wave of fear washed over the children. The shape moved with alarming speed, revealing the patterned body of an enormous python. The snake attacked with shocking swiftness, its jaws clamping onto Mina's side as its body coiled around her. Her cousin screamed as the snake's grip tightened, forcing the air from her lungs. The water churned as Mina fought against the snake, then went still as the python dragged her into deeper water. The children fled back to the village, screaming for help. It took what felt like an eternity for the men to grab their long knives and rush to the river. By the time they arrived, the snake was still thrashing in the water, Mina held beneath its coils. The men waded in, hacking at the python until it finally released her. They pulled her onto the muddy bank, but it was clear she had been underwater for too long. Her skin was cold and pale, her lips a deep blue. The villagers desperately tried pressing on her chest and breathing into her mouth, while others stood by in stunned silence. When they pressed on her chest, water gushed from her mouth and nose, mixing with the mud beneath her head. Someone captured the desperate scene on a phone, the sounds of shouting and rushing water mingling with the thud of knives against the snake's body. Their efforts continued for several minutes, but there was no sign of life. Mina's body was laid on a mat near the water, the villagers gathering in silence. For weeks, the river bend remained deserted. Fishermen refused to cast their nets there, calling the area cursed. The village learned a harsh lesson. Even familiar places can harbour unexpected dangers, especially when wild animals are driven closer to human settlements in search of water and food. Mina's dream of teaching children to swim safely took on a new, tragic meaning as the community resolved to prevent such tragedies from happening again. Then, my thoughts drift to Sweetwater, Texas on June 10, 2013. The fairground was scorching under a cloudless sky. The heat, radiating from the tarps and metal bleachers, turned what should have been a routine demonstration into a day where small mistakes could have devastating consequences. Samuel "Sammy" Price was 38 years old and had been a volunteer snake handler at the annual Rattlesnake Roundup since he was a child. He was a local handyman who showed up every year to handle snakes for visitors. People respected him because I've seen firsthand how quickly a moment of confidence can turn into tragedy, especially when dealing with powerful forces of nature. The story of Sammy, a seasoned snake handler, has stayed with me for years. It's a stark reminder that experience, while valuable, isn't always enough against the unpredictable. Sammy was a steady presence, a veteran who patiently taught new volunteers the ropes. He favoured hands-on demonstrations over lectures, believing that practical experience was the best way to minimise risk. Locals trusted him because of his careful approach. He never rushed and gently corrected mistakes. But even with all his experience, the unexpected happened. The festival that year drew a larger crowd, which led organizers to tighten the schedule. Sammy had been moving between snake pits since morning, answering questions and spending hours under the hot sun. He skipped a full breakfast to keep things running smoothly, and started feeling weary, attributing it to the heat and fatigue. His colleagues urged him to rest and hydrate, but he kept working, driven by a sense of duty. When asked to do one more demonstration that afternoon, he agreed, seeing it as his responsibility. The roundup used shallow pits surrounded by temporary barriers, with a raised platform for the announcer and chairs for the audience. The air was thick with the smells of fried food, car exhaust, and dust. Shade cloths and water containers were available, but the space was cramped, leaving volunteers exposed to the sun. Spectators crowded the fence, phones in hand, recording every move. The setup, designed for clear viewing, reduced the handlers' mobility and limited opportunities for both them and the animals to cool down. Western diamondback rattlesnakes, potent pit vipers typically 4 to 5 feet long, possess venom that causes tissue damage, bleeding, and potentially shock throughout the body. These snakes can strike with surprising speed and reach. When stressed, a snake can twist unexpectedly, altering the handler's grip and exposing vulnerable skin. Even experienced handlers are at risk when a snake is already agitated, or when heat and repeated handling elevate its stress levels. That day, organizers had reminded volunteers to take turns and limit heavy handling during the hottest hours, prompted by a minor incident earlier in the morning. Medical personnel were on standby with IV fluids and anti-venom. Sammy heard the warnings and agreed, but the demands of the crowd and the busy schedule pulled him back. He took a heavy Western diamondback from a colleague and entered the pit, wearing a leather glove and carrying a snake hook. With practiced ease, he lifted the snake. For a moment, the crowd relaxed, calmed by Sammy's steady demeanor. But then, the snake, stressed, shifted, and twisted violently. It lunged, its fangs sinking into the soft tissue near Sammy's elbow. A sharp pain shot through his arm. He signaled that he was all right, but his face flushed and sweat beaded on his forehead. He continued talking to the crowd for a few minutes, but his breathing grew shallow, and he asked for a chair. The bite area swelled rapidly, and discoloration spread down his forearm. Within minutes, the swelling reached his shoulder, the skin darkening with mottled bruising as tissue damage progressed. Volunteers moved him to the first aid tent when he could no longer stand. Paramedics applied Prez to slow the venom's spread, started IV fluids, and administered the first vials of anti-venom. His breathing became shallow, his skin cold and blotched with bruising. Despite the rapid response, his blood pressure plummeted and his pulse faded. Witnesses later recounted the desperate attempts to keep him conscious as medics called for an airlift that never arrived in time. In the aftermath, friends and fellow handlers organized training sessions, inviting regional medics to review emergency procedures and practice drills. One of Sammy's younger relatives began helping at the pits, prioritizing breaks and hydration over showmanship. The festival board documented the incident and created a checklist for demonstrations, including maximum handling times, mandatory breaks, and a swift evacuation plan to the nearest ambulance access point. It's a grim reminder that even in controlled environments, the wild remains unpredictable, and that sometimes even the most experienced among us are vulnerable. Now, I want to shift gears to a different story, one that also involves humans and animals, but in a very different setting. Picture, if you will, the dense rainforests of southeastern Cameroon on March 15th, 2016. The silverback sat calmly beside the lifeless body for the next 4 hours. He would occasionally groom blood from his hands. It's a scene that haunts me, even now. The banality of the act, the casualness of it, after such unimaginable violence. Warning signs, I've learned, are often missed or ignored. In the case of Erica and Caesar, they had been mounting for months. Caesar's behaviour had been deteriorating, a direct result of improper care. It's easy to forget, I think, that Western lowland gorillas are among the most powerful primates on Earth. An adult male can possess the strength of 10 humans. Their hands can exert crushing force. Their canine teeth can tear through flesh and bone. Despite their generally peaceful nature in the wild, captive gorillas under stress can become unpredictably violent, especially when confronted with perceived threats. Caesar had been showing classic signs of psychological distress from improper captivity and inadequate social interaction. These magnificent creatures require specialized care that few private individuals can provide. On that evening, Erica's frustration reached its breaking point. Caesar sat defiantly in the center of his enclos, ignoring her increasingly loud commands to enter his night quarters. Determined to assert her dominance, she grabbed a makeshift electric prod, fashioned from old logging equipment, and unlocked the heavy gate to his small, reinforced pen. It was a fatal decision. As she stepped inside, wielding the electrical device, Caesar's behavior shifted instantly from passive resistance to explosive aggression. The 3 to 75-pound silverback charged across the enclos. His body slammed into Erica's chest with the force of a small vehicle, launching her backward into the metal fence. The rusted metal cut deep into her back as Caesar's enormous hands grabbed her face, his thumbs pressing into her eye sockets. Blood streamed down her cheeks as his fingernails tore at her skin. Caesar's powerful jaws clamped down on her left ear, severing it completely. Erica's screams echoed across the empty rainforest as the gorilla grabbed her right hand, still clutching the makeshift prod. His bite force crushed 3 fingers at the knuckles, severing them entirely. The enraged primate lifted Erica's body off the ground and shook her violently. Her shoulder dislocated with an audible pop as Caesar slammed her face first into the concrete floor. Her nose shattered on impact, creating a growing pool of blood beneath her head. The gorilla then grabbed her right leg with both massive hands and twisted, snapping her femur bone, the jagged fracture tearing through muscle and skin. Caesar positioned himself over Erica's prone form and brought both fists down on her ribcage. 6 ribs cracked simultaneously, the broken bones puncturing both lungs. Her breathing became shallow and labored as blood filled her chest cavity. For his final attack, Caesar grabbed Erica's head between his massive palms and squeezed. Her skull cracked, and brain matter leaked onto the concrete floor. Her body went completely limp. Local villagers discovered the scene the following morning, when the usual sounds of morning feeding never came. Cameroonian authorities launched an immediate investigation, and wildlife officials worked to relocate Caesar to the Lima Wildlife Centre. The incident sparked renewed debate about foreign nationals operating illegal wildlife facilities and the dangers to both operators and local communities. Government agents seized all remaining animals from the property within days. Erica's family released a statement expressing their grief while acknowledging the inherent dangers of keeping such powerful animals in captivity. It was July 22nd, 2017, along the pristine banks of Idaho's Salmon River, that another tragedy was brewing. The remote wilderness area, known for its crystal-clear streams and abundant wildlife, had become the destination for the Price family's annual camping adventure. Landon Price, a 34-year-old construction foreman, had driven his wife Sarah and their 2 young children to this secluded spot. But this trip was different. In the back of their pickup truck, secured in a modified dog crate, was their most unusual family member. 2 years earlier, Landon had purchased Scout, a mountain cougar cub, from an exotic animal dealer operating in the grey areas of wildlife law. His overconfident personality had convinced him that his experience with domestic animals would translate perfectly to raising a wild predator. He kept the growing cougar in a reinforced shed behind their suburban home, telling curious neighbors it was simply an unusually large dog breed. Sarah, an elementary school teacher, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Scout's presence, especially after the children began complaining that the animal's eyes looked mean during feeding times. The warning signs, again, had been mounting for weeks. Scout had killed 3 neighborhood cats in the past month, leaving their partially eaten remains scattered around the property. Just 2 weeks prior, the cougar had escaped from his enclosure and stalked the mail carrier for several blocks before Landon managed to recapture him. Local game wardens had received multiple reports of unusual animal sounds coming from the Price residence. But, bureaucratic Della, it's a fatal error to assume a wild animal ever loses its instincts, no matter how it's raised. I've seen it time and again in my research. Their hunting behavior only intensifies when they're placed in unfamiliar environments, where their sense of territory goes into overdrive. That's what Landon discovered, tragically. He made the decision to release Scout, his 3-year-old cougar, from the transport crate, thinking it would be good for the animal to stretch and explore. He truly thought Scout's upbringing had somehow tamed the wildness inside, that he could treat this predator like a big house cat. As his family began setting up their fishing gear near the water, Scout emerged from confinement and immediately began surveying this new territory. His tawny coat blended perfectly with the brush. Those yellow eyes missed nothing, cataloguing every sound and movement. All 140 pounds of cougar, his predatory instincts kicking in the moment Landon walked toward the river to fill their water containers. I can almost see it. Scout's pupils dilating as he crouched behind a fallen log, muscles coiled tight, his tail twitching, the classic hunting signal. He calculated the distance, the timing, with deadly precision. Then, in complete silence, he launched himself, covering 20 feet in a single explosive leap. His body struck Landon squarely in the back. Those 4-inch claws sank deep into Landon's shoulders, designed to grip struggling prey. And then the jaws clamped down on the back of Landon's neck with that same surgical precision. The cougar's canines, evolved for this very kill, punctured the cervical vertebrae, severing the spinal cord instantly. Paralysis set in immediately, from the neck down. Landon couldn't move, his face submerged. He drowned within 90 seconds. His body went limp as Scout maintained his grip, following millions of years of evolutionary programming to when his prey was subdued. Then another instinct took over. The cougar dragged Landon's lifeless body toward the brush, to cache his kill away from scavengers. Sarah grabbed Emma and Jake, rushing them to the safety of their locked truck. They stayed there for 3 terrifying hours until park rangers arrived. Authorities immediately launched an investigation into the illegal possession of the cougar, while wildlife officials worked to capture Scout. The incident, as such incidents always do, reignited the debate about owning exotic animals and the dangers they pose. Then there's the story of Marcus Ellison on September 8, 2015. It happened on a sprawling ranch in South Texas under a sky full of stars. His remote 50-acre estate was miles from anyone, perfect isolation for a dangerous hobby. This 41-year-old oil rig worker had converted an old barn into a makeshift big cat facility, reinforced enclose and feeding areas included. He shared the property with his girlfriend, Lisa Chen, a 28-year-old veterinary technician. She had grown increasingly concerned about their unusual housemate. 4 years earlier, Marcus had bought Luna, a 6-month-old jaguar cub, from a black market dealer operating along the Texas-Mexico border. A thrill seeker, he collected dangerous animals as status symbols, spending his oil rig earnings on these exotic pets. Luna had grown from an adorable spotted kitten into a powerful 180-pound predator. But Marcus was convinced that their bond, forged in her cubhood, would protect him. Lisa had been pressuring him for months to surrender Luna to a proper sanctuary, especially after witnessing the jaguar's increasingly erratic behavior. The warning signs had been mounting steadily. Luna had refused all food for 4 days, even her favorite cuts of meat. She had begun marking her territory throughout the house, leaving her scent on furniture and walls to assert her dominance. Her obsessive pacing had worn visible paths in the dirt floor of her enclosure, and Lisa noticed that Luna's pupils were constantly dilated, a sign of severe psychological stress. Neighbors miles away reported hearing strange vocalizations echoing across the countryside at night. Jaguars, I should note, are the 3rd largest big cat in the world. They have the strongest bite force of any feline, capable of crushing turtle shells and caiman skulls with ease. Apex predators, designed for killing. Muscular bodies built for explosive power, jaws that can exert over 1,500 pounds of press per square inch. Unlike other big cats that typically suffocate their prey, jaguars deliver precise killing bites directly through the skull or spine. Efficient predators. Even hand-raised jaguars retain all their wild instincts. They can become unpredictably aggressive when stressed or challenged. And Marcus made his fatal mistake when he decided to enter Luna's enclosure without backup or safety equipment. Concerned about her refusal to eat, he believed their years-long bond would allow him to safely investigate. He unlocked the gate to her 30x 40-foot pen and stepped inside, carrying only a small flashlight to illuminate the darkness. Luna sat motionless in the shadows, her yellow eyes reflecting the beam as he approached. All 180 pounds of jaguar, waiting for this moment. As Marcus knelt 15 feet away and extended his hand in what he thought was a gesture of comfort, Luna's predatory instincts took complete control. Her powerful muscles, coiled like steel springs, propelled her across the enclosure in 2 swift bounds. The attack was swift, devastatingly precise. Her massive body slammed into Marcus's chest. I've often reflected on the inherent risks we take when we try to control the wild. Luna, a jaguar in Texas, demonstrated this with brutal clarity. Her jaws locked around Marcus's throat with surgical precision, crushing his windpipe and severing arteries, all with a bite force of 1,500 lb per square inch. Marcus lost consciousness in seconds. The next morning, Lisa found Luna calmly grooming blood from her paws. Marcus's partially consumed body, a grim testament to the power of wild instincts. The incident reignited debates about exotic animal ownership. Now I'm drawn to another tragedy, this one unfolding in Florida, on June 14, 2018. In a seemingly peaceful suburban neighborhood, an elaborate backyard pond system housed one of nature's most dangerous predators. Brianna Ellis, a 26-year-old marine biology student, was using this pond for her thesis research on reptilian behavior. 2 years prior, she had rescued Brutus, a 9-foot American alligator, from a failing roadside attraction. She believed she could safely study Brutus while providing him proper care. But warning signs had been escalating. Brutus had become increasingly aggressive, lunging at the pond's edge during feeding times. Neighbors complained of strange splashing sounds at night. American alligators are ambush hunters, perfectly evolved killing machines capable of exerting nearly 3,000 lb of press per square inch. Their bite force is strong enough to crush a bowling ball. Brianna made her fatal mistake as dusk settled over Florida. She entered the pond to retrieve pH testing equipment, despite warnings from her friends. Dusk, of course, is the most active hunting period for alligators. As Brianna waded into the water, Brutus began his approach with the stealth that had made his species apex predators for millions of years. The 350 lb alligator moved through the water, creating no visible wake as he closed the distance. Brianna bent down, focused on her task, unaware that Brutus had positioned himself just 6 feet away. The alligator remained perfectly motionless beneath the surface, preparing for his explosive assault. The attack came with devastating force. Brutus launched himself upward, his jaws opening wide, encompassing Brianna's entire right thigh. His jaw press crushed her femur bone instantly. I've seen the aftermath of these tragedies, the kind where nature reclaims what we thought we controlled. Sometimes it's a stark reminder of the wildness that still exists, even in our own backyards. The story of Brutus, the alligator, and Brianna. It stays with you. An alligator dragged her toward the deeper section of the pond, holding her underwater for nearly 2 minutes. Her lungs filled with water and blood. By the time the dive team arrived, they only recovered scattered remains. Then there's the chilling case of Sean Gallagher. It was October 3rd, 2016, in the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York. 15 miles from his nearest neighbor, Sean lived in a weathered log cabin, a sanctuary born of disgrace. He was a 38-year-old former wildlife rehabilitator who lost his license after a bear incident. He retreated to this inherited family property, a bitter and increasingly paranoid man. He wasn't alone, though. Sean shared his remote cabin with Kodiak, an 8-year-old, 400-pound American black bear. He'd illegally acquired the animal as an injured cub 3 years prior, claiming to rescue it. His obsession with proving his rehabilitation methods were superior to state-approved programs drove him to keep Kodiak, despite losing his professional credentials. The bear lived in a reinforced room within the cabin, a makeshift arrangement that grew increasingly inadequate as Kodiak matured. Sean's journal entries revealed growing paranoia about the bear's intentions. Kodiak systematically destroyed the cabin's interior, tearing apart furniture and clawing at the wooden walls. He became increasingly aggressive when Sean limited his food, displaying territorial behavior. Most concerning was Kodiak's obsessive testing of the door and window strength, repeatedly pushing against the barriers as if calculating escape routes. American black bears are deceptively powerful. Adult males can reach speeds of 30 mph and possess the strength to overturn boulders weighing several hundred pounds. Their jaws can exert over 800 pounds of press per square inch, easily crushing human skulls. Their 4-inch claws are designed for climbing and digging, but are devastatingly effective weapons. Black bears are naturally nocturnal, most active during twilight and nighttime hours when their predatory instincts are heightened. Sean made his fatal mistake at 2:30 in the morning when he decided to enter Kodiak's reinforced room to retrieve his damaged laptop and camera equipment. The bear appeared to be sleeping peacefully in the corner of the 50-20 foot space. Sean desperately needed to recover his electronics before they were completely destroyed. He stepped quietly into the room, carrying only a small flashlight, believing Kodiak was in a deep sleep. But Kodiak had been awake for hours, waiting. His senses were at peak alertness during these early morning hours, and captivity had made him increasingly territorial about his confined space. The 400-pound black bear moved with surprising speed and agility. Kodiak rose to his full height of 7 feet and charged across the room in 3 powerful strides. Sean had no time to react. Kodiak's first strike came from his massive right paw, equipped with 4-inch claws. The blow struck Sean squarely in the chest with tremendous force, raking 4 parallel gashes across his rib cage that penetrated deep into muscle and bone. The impact launched Sean backward into the reinforced wall. Before Sean could even attempt to defend himself, Kodiak pressed his attack. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down on Sean's head, encompassing his skull from temple to temple. Kodiak's bite force of 800 pounds per square inch crushed Sean's skull like an eggshell, causing immediate and catastrophic brain trauma. Sean's body went completely limp within seconds, but Kodiak's defensive rage kept driving the assault. The bear mauled with relentless power, claws raking and jaws crushing bone as if to eliminate a threat rather than feed. In his fury, Kodiak tore into Sean's torso, ribs splintering under the prez. The attack continued for 15 minutes before Kodiak finally retreated to his corner, leaving Sean's partially consumed remains scattered across the wooden floor. The bear sat calmly, grooming blood from its claws and muzzle. Sean's body was discovered 3 days later, when concerned neighbors noticed smoke was no longer rising from the cabin's chimney. I remember reading about a Bengal tiger that killed its owner, and the details stayed with me for days. It happened on the outskirts of Houston, Texas, on a humid spring day. The man was a mechanic named Michael Torres. He was 41 and known for his patience, preferring engines to people. But he also kept a 6-year-old Bengal tiger named Raja in a chain-link enclosure behind his house. Michael believed he had earned Raja's trust, claiming the animal recognized his scent and would never hurt him. But one overcast afternoon, while Michael was cleaning the enclosure, Raja attacked. A friend, Luis Alvarez, watched in horror as the tiger lunged, its paw striking Michael's face before clamping its jaws around his neck and shoulder. The construction noise nearby had agitated the tiger all morning. Bengal tigers are apex predators, and even those raised from cubs retain their hunting instincts. They can crush bone with a bite exceeding 1,000 lbs of pres, and their attacks rarely involve warning growls. Movement itself can be the trigger. Luis saw the tiger freeze mid-stride, its body crouching low to the ground, tail twitching rapidly, before it lunged. Luis tried to intervene, throwing a wrench and gravel, but it was no use. Raja shook its head violently, lifting and slamming Michael's limp body against the ground. When deputies arrived, one officer shot Raja in the shoulder as the tiger charged the fence. Michael's body showed extensive trauma. He had no secondary containment system, no safety barrier, and the open gate gave the tiger full access once the attack began. Another case that comes to mind occurred on January 14, 2016, in Surabaya, Indonesia. Behind a row of warehouses, an auto parts importer named Ahmad Firdos was conducting a private experiment in control that was nearing its inevitable breaking point. I'll never forget the story of Ahmad and his Komodo dragon. He treated it like a misunderstood companion, never realizing that to it he was always prey. It's a hard lesson, one paid for in blood. That Thursday morning was still and overcast, the smell of diesel drifting from the nearby road. Ahmad had skipped feeding the previous evening, distracted by a shipment problem. By sunrise, he noticed the dragon's water basin overturned and filthy. Wanting to clean it before the day's work began, the gate creaked as he entered the enclosure. The animal was in the far corner, body motionless. Komodo dragons can grow up to 10 ft and deliver a bite strong enough to crush bone. Their venom contains anticoagulants and toxins that cause rapid blood loss and lowered blood pres, weakening prey through shock. They are ambush predators, capable of bursts of speed despite their heavy frame. In captivity, they can become defensive or aggressive if handled frequently or underfed. Yudi, working in the front section of the warehouse, heard the clang of metal and a low thud. Then came a sharp cry. He dropped his clipboard and ran toward the back, rounding the corner just as Ahmad fell. The dragon had latched onto his right calf, its teeth sunk deep through fabric and skin. Blood darkened the concrete beneath him. Ahmad kicked out with his free leg, yelling for Yudi to get help. The dragon released, its head jerking back before it lunged again, jaws clamping down on Ahmad's forearm. Ahmad tried to pull away, but the animal twisted its head side to side, shaking loose strips of muscle. Yudi grabbed a metal pole, leaning by the fence, and swung hard, striking the dragon's side. It turned, mouth gaping, tongue flicking, tail whipping across the floor. When it faced him again, its throat bulged with each breath, saliva stringing from its jaws. Ahmad tried to crawl backward, leaving a thick smear of blood behind. The dragon lunged once more, this time catching his side just below the ribs. Its jaws locked, teeth sinking deep as it began to pull, ripping through skin and tissue. Ahmad's scream broke into a gasping rasp. Yudi struck again and again, shouting until the creature finally backed off a few feet. Ahmad slumped onto his back, eyes open, one hand pressed weakly against the wound. The concrete beneath him gleamed dark red, the smell of iron thick in the humid air. Yudi ran to the fen gate, dragging a burlap sack from a supply shelf. He waved it near the dragon's face, forcing it to focus on the movement. The animal lunged toward the sack, and Yudi managed to pull the gate shut, locking it with trembling hands. He turned to Ahmad, who was still. The blood loss had been catastrophic. By the time emergency responders arrived from the nearest clinic, Ahmad was already gone. Later reports confirmed he had suffered multiple deep lacerations to the leg, arm, and abdomen with significant internal bleeding. Death was attributed to massive exsanguination and traumatic shock from the venom's anticoagulant effects. Veterinarians who examined the animal later said it had shown signs of food aggression, behavior triggered when prey or a familiar handler moves suddenly during feeding. Police secured the warehouse and contacted Indonesia's Natural Resources Conservation Agency. The Komodo dragon, measuring just under 7 ft and weighing nearly 140 lb, was sedated and transported to a wildlife rehabilitation center in Banyangi. Officials identified it as originating from Rinca Island, confirming it had been obtained through illegal trade networks. The story reached local newspapers for only a day before being buried beneath business and traffic reports. Neighbors remembered Ahmad as generous, the man who sponsored youth football games and handed out bottled water to delivery drivers. But within the warehouse community, the story circulated quietly, a warning told in fragments. It was May 30th, 2014, near Bozeman, Montana. The morning was clear and still, the kind of quiet that hung heavy before the heat built up. A line of spruce trees framed the small animal sanctuary Mark Jennings had built from the ground up. Inside, one enclosure stood larger than the rest, its occupant pacing slow, deliberate circles. By noon, that silence would be shattered. Mark Jennings was 49, a former wildlife handler for film productions. He had left the industry in his 30s to start an educational sanctuary outside Bozeman. He ran school tours, wildlife demonstrations, and rescue programs for injured raptors and foxes. His pride was a 1,000 lb brown bear named Bruno, raised from a cub after being orphaned during a legal hunt in Alaska. To Mark, Bruno represented proof that wild animals could bond with humans through trust rather than fear. Bruno had been with him for nearly 12 years. He was intelligent, food-driven, and typically calm around people he knew. The enclos was spacious with reinforced fencing, a pond, and a shaded feeding platform. Mark managed most care himself, but occasionally brought in help. Aaron Cole was one of those helpers. A licensed trainer who had worked with Bruno multiple times without issue. She followed protocols carefully, but admitted she always kept her distance during feeding. Mark trusted her completely, enough to call her one of the few people Bruno recognized. Brown bears of Kodiak lineage are among the largest terrestrial carnivores, capable of standing over 9 ft tall and delivering a bite force exceeding 1 to 200 lb per square inch. While generally solitary and predictable in the wild, captivity can alter their tolerance thresholds. Even long-term handlers face risk if food, scent, or routine changes. During feeding, aggression can surface suddenly, triggered by I've often wondered about the last thing that goes through someone's mind in those final moments. The medical report would later confirm that Mark died from blunt and penetrating trauma to his chest and neck. Aaron survived, but only after multiple surgeries to repair her arm and shoulder. Investigators concluded that the feeding gate hadn't been properly secured. This allowed Bruno to push through before the food was placed. Food aggression, they said, was the cause. A sudden, violent response to perceived competition over a meal. In the months that followed, Aaron withdrew completely from working with animals. She sold her training equipment, moved to Missoula, and refused all interviews. Friends told me she became very quiet, often waking from sleep at the faintest sound of metal gates or animal breathing. She never returned to the sanctuary. Then, on August 19, 2017, in the Limpopo province of South Africa, the air hung heavy after the previous night's storm. The ground was damp, and the acacia trees dripped. At Johan Boer's game lodge, in the lion enclos beyond the guest bungalows, a large male paced in slow, deliberate circles. It was mid-morning, and tourists had yet to arrive. Johan decided to tend to the animal himself, a routine he had performed hundreds of times before. But this time it would end differently. Johan was 46, a former ranger who had transformed his modest patch of bushland into a profitable wildlife lodge. He was known for his confidence around big cats, comfortable where others were cautious. Over the years, he had cultivated an image of connection between man and predator. His prized attraction was Simba, a 7-year-old male lion raised at the lodge since he was a cub. Tourists would pay to pose with him through the fence. Sometimes, for a higher fee, Johan would lead them into the outer section of the enclos for photographs. He saw it as education and conservation mixed with business. To his staff, Johan was competent but stubborn. He had a habit of trusting his instincts over protocols. Employees described him as meticulous with animal care, yet dismissive of warnings when it came to Simba. The lion was fully grown, nearly 500 pounds, and though raised in captivity, he retained the instincts of a wild predator. Still, Johan insisted Simba recognized him as a constant presence. He would often enter the cage alone to clean or adjust the feeding structure. Adult male lions, especially those kept in captivity, can exhibit erratic behavior when stressed. Their territorial instincts can surge unpredictably, especially after storms when scents shift and sound travels differently. A single swipe of a paw can break bone. Their bite, over 650 pounds per square inch, is built to crush windpipes. Even with long-term handlers, moments of agitation can become fatal within seconds. According to pieced-together evidence and reports, Simba had been restless since the thunderstorm. The overnight lightning had sent him pacing and roaring through the night, rubbing his mane against the fence. Peter LaRue, the caretaker, noticed this behavior early and told Johann that morning to postpone cleaning until the animal calmed down. Johann brushed it off, saying the lion got anxious if ignored. Around 9 a.m., Johann took a broom and bucket toward the enclos, while a visiting maintenance worker tested a new camera. I've often wondered about the line between fascination and obsession, especially when it comes to animals. I remember reading about Linda Reeves, a retired lab technician in Mobile, Alabama. She'd spent her life working with animals, and when she retired, she poured her savings into building an enclos for 2 chimpanzees she'd adopted. She named them Buddy and Rosie, and to her, they were family. But that bond, that dream, would soon turn into a nightmare. It was October 6th, 2013. 2 large cages stood behind Linda's modest brick house, the bars streaked with rust. Inside, Buddy and Rosie were making sharp, uneven calls. Within the hour, a small routine would turn violent and irreversible. Linda was 58. Her co-workers remembered her as disciplined and precise, with a fascination for animals that bordered on obsession. She fed Buddy and Rosie breakfast cereal, dressed them in children's clothes, and sometimes let them sit in the living room to watch television through the screen door. Her brother Tom visited weekly. He loved her, but worried constantly. The chimps, once under 70 pounds, had grown fast. Buddy now weighed over 130, his arms thick and muscular, while Rosie was nearing 100. Chimpanzees are strong beyond proportion, 5 times the upper body strength of an adult man. Males can weigh over 150 pounds. Their jaws are capable of shattering bone with a bite force near 1,200 pounds per square inch. In the wild, they display bursts of extreme aggression when agitated or competing for dominance, targeting the face, hands, and genitals of their opponents. Captivity often amplifies these instincts, especially when confinement or frustration builds. Tom had seen them rattle the cage doors when upset and warned Linda repeatedly that they were no longer controllable. It was routine now. Feed, clean, groom, and talk to them like children. But that Sunday morning, the routine would unravel. On that day, Linda carried a plastic bowl filled with banana slices and apples into the enclos. Tom stood by the porch, watching her through the screen. Buddy screeched as she entered, bouncing on his knuckles while Rosie clung to the bars. Linda told them to sit, setting the fruit on a flat rock. Buddy reached before she gave the signal, grabbing her wrist. She pulled back, scolding him sharply. The sound he made next, a deep, chesty pan hoot, was different from his usual play noise. Tom saw the shift immediately. Buddy lunged, knocking Linda backward onto the concrete. The fruit scattered. Rosie screamed, leaping down from the bars. Linda's voice rose in short, panicked bursts as Buddy pinned her by the chest, one hand on her shoulder, the other tearing at her hair. Tom dropped his mug and froze for a second before fumbling for his phone to dial 911. Buddy's hands were red, gripping a handful of Linda's scalp. The screams turned ragged as Buddy's teeth closed around her face. He bit through her cheek. Rosie joined, latching onto Linda's arm. Tom ran to the fence, striking it with a shovel while shouting into the phone for help. Buddy's head jerked up, eyes wide and black, before he went back to tearing. The fence rattled under the blows, but neither chimp reacted for long. I still think about the bare patch of concrete, stained faintly dark where the hose couldn't wash everything away. It's a stark reminder that some things, no matter how hard we try, can never truly be cleaned. It was April 17th, 2015. A bright, warm afternoon just outside Chicago, Illinois. Yellow school buses pulled into the parking lot of a small private animal park. I remember those kinds of roadside zoos, fading paint on the signs, rust showing through the old fences. Families with strollers, school groups carrying packed lunches, teachers trying to keep order as students pointed at parrots, goats, and monkeys in cramped pens. The chimpanzee exhibit sat near the middle of the park, behind a low chain-link railing and a shallow moat lined with algae. A hand-painted sign. No climbing or leaning on fence. Inside, 2 adult males and 1 younger female lived together among wooden climbing structures and a patch of worn grass. The walls were streaked with moisture stains. It looked outdated, especially compared to modern habitats in larger, accredited zoos. One of the visitors that day was a 12-year-old named Matthew Collins, a 6th grader on a spring field trip. His mother worked night shifts as a nurse. His father operated a forklift. They didn't travel much, but Matthew loved animals and never missed a chance to see them up close. His teachers described him as bright but impulsive, a boy who liked to climb anything taller than himself. He carried a second-hand digital camera, saved for by helping neighbors mow lawns. He wanted to get the best photos of the chimps out of anyone in his class. By mid-afternoon, the group gathered near the chimp enclos. The air smelled of hay, damp earth, and the sour trace of leftover feed. The students crowded against the metal barrier, talking and laughing. Matthew, standing near the back, raised his camera, but couldn't get a clear view. Wanting a better angle, he stepped onto the lower rail for balance. Some classmates noticed and told him to stop. He ignored them, focused on his shot, and leaned forward. The railing was slick with humidity, and the ledge beneath his shoe gave slightly. As he leaned forward to center the chimps in frame, his foot slipped. A few students gasped as his arms windmilled. Then he dropped over the rail and into the pit below. He landed hard on his right side, rolling onto his stomach with a groan. From above, teachers screamed his name. Some kids started crying. For a moment, the enclos was silent, except for the soft panting of the chimps. Then one of the males, an older, broad-shouldered chimp named Bo, stood upright, bristling with tension. He gave a sharp hoot, slapped the dirt, and started towards the boy. The younger male followed, puffing air through his lips in short bursts. Visitors who were close enough later said the sounds were chilling, deep hoots that rose in pitch, the rhythmic drumming of palms on the ground. The two chimps stopped about 10 feet away, heads tilted, eyes fixed on the strange figure that had dropped into their space. Bo took 2 quick steps forward and grabbed a fistful of Matthew's shirt. Matthew screamed and tried to crawl backward, but the chimp's grip was iron. Bo's first strike wasn't a feeding bite, but a dominance blow, a sharp smack to the side of the head that knocked the boy sideways. Then came the bite, a hard, fast clamp on the arm near the wrist. The smaller male joined in from the other side, pulling at the boy's sleeve and striking his shoulder. The sounds of hitting and tearing mixed with hoots and panicked screams from above. A zookeeper stationed near a nearby enclosure heard the commotion and ran toward the enclosure, shouting for the crowd to move back. He grabbed a hose from the maintenance shed and sprayed into the pit, the high-press stream breaking the chimp's focus for seconds at a time. Bo let go, slapped the ground, and charged forward again, stopping inches from the water spray. The younger male backed away, pacing in circles while pant-hooting. For nearly half a minute, the two chimps alternated between lunging and retreating as keepers threw fruit and banged metal poles against the barrier to draw them off. Eventually, Bo released his grip on the torn fabric of Matthew's shirt. Years later, I would read another account of a similar tragedy, this time involving a woman named Linda. She tried to crawl toward the gate, blood pooling beneath her. One of the chimps grabbed her by the hair, dragging her back. He bit her neck once, then again, each time slower, deliberate. Her body stiffened, then slackened. The attack lasted less than a minute, but to her husband, Tom, it stretched endlessly. The sound of skin tearing, replaced only by his own shouting. By the time deputies arrived about 10 minutes later, the yard was silent. The chimps stood near the body, panting. One of them had blood on his hands and chest. Another sat beside the gate, rocking slightly. Officers attempted to use tranquilizers, but one of the chimps charged the fence, snapping at the air. A deputy then fired 2 rifle rounds through the bars, hitting him in the chest and neck. Both animals fell inside the enclosure, their bodies still twitching, when Tom was led away by paramedics. Deputies found Linda near the center of the cage. She had suffered massive trauma, scalp avulsion, facial disfigurement, and multiple fractures. Her pulse was gone before help arrived. Investigators noted that the outer gate had not been locked, a lapse in Linda's usually strict routine. Tom refused interviews. He moved away within months, leaving the house empty, and the enclosure to rust behind tall weeds. At the funeral, held quietly in a mobile chapel, a few former co-workers attended. They remembered Linda as gentle and curious. But behind the condolences lingered a shared disbelief that a bond built over years could turn fatal in seconds. The enclosure was later dismantled, leaving only that bare patch of concrete. I've seen the aftermath of animal attacks, and the images haunt you. One that particularly stuck with me was from June 11th, 2014, in Stamford, Connecticut. It was an ordinary afternoon, quiet except for the sounds of lawn mowers. But inside one of those neat houses on Rockledge Drive, a woman was about to face an attack that would shock the entire community. Belinda Holmes, 57, lived in that house. She was known for keeping an unusual companion, a male chimpanzee named Charlie. She'd gotten him as an infant years earlier, ignoring state laws. She raised him like a child, dressing him in clothes, feeding him at the table, driving him around in her car. For years, Charlie was a local spectacle. Children stared when he looked out the windows. Neighbours watched Belinda walk him on a leash. She treated him like family, but there were warning signs. By age 12, Charlie weighed over 120 libs. Belinda struggled to hold him back when he became upset, but she insisted he was gentle. The house itself showed years of living with the animal. Furniture was scratched and damaged, and the air often smelled of animal musk. On that warm June day, Charlie grew restless, pacing and making noise, as Belinda tried to calm him with fruit. Years of living in a human household hadn't removed Charlie's natural instincts. I've learned that when stressed or frustrated, a chimpanzee's aggression can surface suddenly, with violence that no amount of familiarity can prevent. There had been warnings. Months earlier, Charlie escaped into the yard, chased cars, and pounded on a vehicle. State officials reminded Belinda that owning him was illegal, but she ignored the fines. On the afternoon of June 11th, his agitation was clear. He banged on the table, knocked over a chair, and showed his teeth. Belinda moved closer to grab his arm, and the attack started in seconds. Charlie lunged forward and slammed Belinda backward into the couch. His hands gripped her shoulders, and his teeth sank into her face. Neighbours heard the noise through the open windows. Furniture crashed, and Belinda screamed. Charlie bit again, tearing into her hands as she tried to protect herself. Blood pooled across the carpet as he continued the assault. Belinda tried to crawl away, but Charlie dragged her back by her clothes. He hit her with his fists, then bit into her forearm and broke the bone. Her screams brought neighbours running. One man tried the door, but stopped when he looked through the window. Charlie was hunched over Belinda, his face and arms covered in blood. The neighbours backed away and called 911. Police arrived within minutes. Through the glass, they saw Charlie attacking, tearing at her scalp and face. There were no cages, no barriers, no way to separate the animal from the victim. When Charlie turned toward the window and pounded against it with bloodied hands, officers decided they had to act. They fired multiple shots. Charlie collapsed in the living room on the blood-stained carpet. Officers rushed inside and pulled Belinda out from under his body. She was barely awake, her face destroyed and her hands mangled. She was airlifted to a trauma centre with critical facial injuries, severe trauma to both hands requiring amputation, and massive blood loss. Afterward, investigators documented the scene. Furniture was flipped over, walls were splattered with blood, and Charlie lay where he had fallen. Belinda's phone was found on the kitchen counter, smeared with blood. The last call she tried to make to 911 was never completed. Neighbours gathered outside. The screams would stay with them forever. That's what some witnesses said after the attack. I can only imagine the horror they felt. In 2009, a chimpanzee named Travis brutally attacked a woman named Belinda. She survived, but her life was irrevocably changed. Multiple surgeries, constant care, a life forever altered. The case became a national flashpoint, a stark reminder of the inherent dangers of keeping exotic animals as pets. Connecticut lawmakers responded swiftly, enacting stricter laws and banning private chimpanzee ownership altogether. The house where it happened was eventually sold, the new owners forever aware of its dark history. Fast forward to May 28, 2017. A Memorial Day barbecue on the outskirts of Austin, Texas, along a bend of the Colorado River. Families gathered at a privately rented picnic site, a quiet patch of grass shaded by live oaks and bordered by open water. Children played, adults unpacked food. But one guest had brought an animal most people only ever see behind thick glass. The victim that day was 36-year-old Daniel Ortiz, a high school track coach, a runner who frequented those trails, a man known for his steadiness and thoughtfulness. He'd stopped by the gathering after a run, drawn by a friend's text about the Riverside barbecue. Daniel, comfortable around animals from his volunteer work at a local shelter, kept a respectful distance from the chimpanzee. The chimp wore a harness, and the owner handed out pieces of fruit. Daniel, wanting to capture a photo to show his students the strange thing he saw on a normal Sunday, moved a few feet forward, angling for a clear shot. But adult male chimpanzees are not suited for public gatherings. Dominance, in their world, is enforced with sudden violence. Years of human handling can't erase those instincts. Crowds, unfamiliar faces, and food competition can trigger them in an instant. This picnic site lay just beyond Austin city limits, beyond municipal oversight. Few realized the handler lacked the proper permits. Tension filled the air. The chimp bared its teeth at a toddler. The owner shortened the leash, but kept feeding it fruit. A passing runner called out that it looked risky. And Daniel nodded, adjusted his stance, waiting for the chimp to settle. He stepped a little closer, maybe 2 feet, to avoid someone's shoulder in his frame. Then, the lunge. A blur of dark arms and bared teeth. The harness yanked tight, but not before the chimp's hand closed on Daniel's wrist. His phone skidded across the dirt. The first bite tore into his forearm, skin and muscle ripped apart. Daniel stumbled backward, trying to pull free, but the chimp's grip did not loosen. Screams erupted from the crowd. The chimp dragged Daniel down, pinning him on his side, climbing up his torso, hammering his shoulder with fists. The leash tangled with the owner's legs, causing him to fall, slackening the leash again. The chimp shifted higher, seized Daniel's head with both hands, and bit into his cheek. Blood pooled in the grass, streaking the chimp's face. Attempts to intervene failed. Kicks, shoves with folding chairs. Nothing worked. The sounds were distinct and awful. Wet impacts of fists, ragged breathing, high-pitched shrieks, and short grunts as teeth met bone. The attack slowed only when the owner managed to loop the leash under the chimp's chest, creating a brief barrier. The chimp released, then lunged again, tearing at Daniel's face and arms before finally losing strength. Daniel's movements weakened. Another bite broke a bone in his wrist. Bystanders threw bottles, tried to shield him with a trash can lid, but nothing worked. Emergency calls went out, but the rural location delayed help. By the time deputies arrived, the shouting had stopped. The chimp sat trembling near the overturned table, the leash twisted tight around its torso. Daniel lay motionless on the trampled grass. By dusk, only tire tracks and a few torn paper plates remained. The river kept moving, slow and steady, carrying away the sounds that haunted that place. I've always been drawn to those moments when the wild world collides with our own, often with devastating consequences. It was September 14th, 2018, in Los Angeles. The sun was just rising over a small production studio, the kind tucked away between warehouses. A chimpanzee, brought in for a simple animal demonstration on a daytime talk show, was about to remind everyone just how unpredictable nature can be. The air that morning was filled with that familiar hum of a film set coming to life. Crew members moved equipment. Cameras were positioned around a staged living room. It was supposed to be a simple segment. Kevin Harris, a 41-year-old trainer, had been working with exotic animals for 2 decades. He'd made a career of teaching wild creatures to tolerate human environments, mostly school assemblies, small commercials, that sort of thing. This TV appearance was just another job. Mike, the 13-year-old chimp, had been with Kevin since he was a baby. At 125 pounds, he was strong, intelligent, and, crucially, unpredictable, especially under stress. Kevin often said Mike knew the rhythm of production, could stay calm amidst the noise. But those who knew chimps knew better. Adulthood changes everything, especially for males. The set was modest enough. A sofa, coffee table, a painted backdrop under hot studio lights. Mike sat on a low stool beside Kevin, wearing only a light collar and leash. He was restless, tugging at the strap, eyes darting around at the unfamiliar faces. Before they started filming, the animal safety coordinator suggested delaying the segment. Mike was showing clear signs of stress, pacing, baring teeth, pulling at the leash. But the director was insistent. The schedule was tight, and the light was shifting. Kevin raised everyone, offering Mike banana slices to calm him. For a moment, the tension seemed to ease. The cameras started rolling, the lights brightened. The host smiled, reading her lines about wildlife awareness. Kevin guided Mike closer, cueing him to wave, a trick they'd practiced countless times. For a few seconds, everything went as planned. Then the boom microphone dipped, casting a shadow across Mike's face. His posture changed instantly. Shoulders hunched, lips curled. A low pant hoot echoed through the room. Kevin turned, voice low, reaching out to calm him. That touch seemed to break the fragile balance. The chimp lunged. The leash snapped tight as Kevin fell backward, the stool clattering on the floor. Mike's hands came down in a rapid series of strikes, fists hammering Kevin's chest. The room erupted in chaos. Shouts, hoots, the crash of equipment. Someone yelled to cut the power. Kevin tried to protect his face, but Mike's jaws locked onto his arm, tearing through muscle and tendons. Blood sprayed across the carpet. The chimp released, then struck again, biting Kevin's shoulder, landing more blows. The host ran off set. Crew members screamed for security. One man swung a tripod, trying to stop the attack, but Mike dodged, gripping Kevin's shirt and dragging him toward the wall. The impact cracked a camera housing. The chimp's shrieks grew higher, rhythmic and mechanical, each sound matching a strike or bite. Kevin's movement slowed, his left arm hanging limp. Another crew member threw a fire extinguisher. The spray filled the air, coating the floor in white dust. Mike released Kevin for a moment, then turned toward the noise, teeth bared and streaked with red. Security burst in, one man with another extinguisher, another with a baton. The first blast of powder hit Mike square in the chest. He reared back. The second spray pushed him away from Kevin, who lay motionless on the floor. Animal control officers arrived within minutes, summoned by the studio's emergency call. They tranquilized Mike on the spot, the dart striking his shoulder as he bared his teeth. He staggered, then collapsed beside the overturned couch, eyes fluttering. Kevin survived, but just barely. Paramedics stabilized him before rushing him to a trauma center. Surgeons later documented dozens of puncture wounds, a shattered forearm, severe facial injuries. He lost part of his arm and most of the muscle tissue on one side of his face. The production shut down. The footage was never aired. In the aftermath, investigators cited lapses in protocol and disregard for the safety consultant's warning. For Kevin, the lesson came at an unbearable cost, one he would spend the rest of his life recovering from. Then, a year later, October 9th, 2019, in western Uganda. A two-lane road, the Kampala-Fortal Highway, S through steep forested hills. It was a lifeline between towns, but a dangerous crossing for wildlife whose habitat had been bisected by asphalt. Martin Blake, a 48-year-old American wildlife photographer, was traveling alone. He'd spent 2 weeks documenting primates in East Africa, hoping for one last series of images before heading home. He was known for chasing difficult shots, often venturing off marked trails to capture animals in unusual settings. That morning, he drove west out of Fortal and stopped where the highway cut through the forest slopes. He'd heard stories of chimpanzees. "I've always been drawn to the blurred edges where the wild meets the human world. Sometimes those edges turn violent. I remember reading the story of a photographer named Martin. He was driven by the desire to capture a unique image of chimpanzees in their natural habitat, along a mountain road. What he found was a brutal reminder of the power and unpredictability of nature. Martin had photographed gorillas and monkeys before, so he had field experience. But his ambition pushed him close to the edge. He parked near a bend in the road and started walking along the shoulder, camera in hand. A local motorbike rider shouted, gesturing towards the trees, but Martin waved him off. He seemed more concerned about speeding trucks than the animals. The highway sliced through lush green ridges, the vegetation pressing close. Traffic came in bursts, followed by long stretches of silence filled only with the sounds of the forest. On one side, a red dirt slope rose 20 feet, draped with vines. On the other, trees leaned over a drop into dense undergrowth. It was along these edges that chimpanzees sometimes appeared, able to easily navigate the embankments and ditches. Their shrinking habitat had made the asphalt another boundary to patrol, and when startled, aggression was their first response. I recall reading that rangers at the visitor centre warned tourists to stay in their vehicles. Truck drivers had reported seeing chimps near bends, where fruit trees grew close to the road. Locals avoided walking alone there, especially in the morning when the animals were most active. Martin had heard the warnings the night before at his lodge, but he dismissed them, thinking of his past experience working safely around gorillas. Just a few minutes into his walk, he spotted movement on the slope above. A large male chimpanzee emerged from the vines, pausing at the edge. Behind him, 2 smaller chimps lingered in the plants. Martin raised his camera, crouching low for a clear shot. A truck roared past, startling the animals. The younger chimps retreated, but the male stood his ground, hooting. Martin kept snapping photos, zooming in. He stepped into the lane, unaware that the chimp was already climbing down towards him. The descent took only seconds. The chimp dropped onto the asphalt with a heavy thud, closing the distance on all fours. Martin lowered his camera just as the animal charged, dark arms swinging with terrifying speed. The impact sent him sprawling backward into the gravel, his camera skidding across the pavement. The chimp grabbed his left arm and dragged him toward the edge of the road. Martin tried to brace himself, but the chimp's strength was overwhelming. The first bite tore into his forearm, ripping skin and muscle. A motorbike braked nearby, the rider shouting in horror. Martin screamed and kicked, but the chimp straddled his chest and struck his head with its fists. Another bite tore into his shoulder. Blood pooled on the gravel, running into the ditch. The younger chimps appeared briefly, hooting and circling before disappearing again. The male remained fixed on Martin, pulling at his clothes and biting again, this time at his ear and jaw. Witnesses tried to intervene. The motorbike rider threw stones, but the chimp barely flinched. A truck slowed, its horn blaring, startling the animal just long enough for Martin to roll onto his side. The chimp dragged him back and sank its teeth into his thigh, shaking violently. The sounds were awful. Martin strained breathing. The chimp's screeches. The crunch of gravel. The attack lasted only a few minutes, but it felt much longer to the witnesses before another vehicle stopped and locals rushed forward, shouting and waving sticks. The chimp released Martin and retreated toward the slope, disappearing into the vines with blood on its face and hands. Martin lay motionless on the roadside, his clothes torn and soaked. Drivers flagged down a passing truck, and he was lifted onto the flatbed using a blanket. With no ambulance nearby, locals tried to apply press to his wounds. As the truck sped toward Fortal, he lost consciousness within minutes. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, he had no pulse. Doctors at the hospital confirmed he was dead on arrival. His camera bag held memory cards with his last images: the forest edge, the red dirt slope, and one blurred frame of the chimp stepping from the vines.